Deep in the sun-scorched earth of the American Southwest, a secret was being carried by foot across hundreds of miles of high desert. It wasn't written in ink or carved in stone. It was held in the hands of young runners in the form of simple yucca fibers, cords tied with a specific number of knots. Each day, the leaders of distant villages would untie one knot. When the final knot was undone, the world as they knew it would end, and a forgotten revolution would begin. This was 1680, and the Spanish Empire, the most formidable power on earth, was about to face its most humiliating defeat on the North American continent. To understand why the Pueblo people rose up, we must look at the decades of tension that turned New Mexico into a powder keg. By the mid-17th century, the Spanish had been in the region for over 80 years. They had established a colony they called Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico, but for the indigenous Pueblo people, it was a land under occupation. The Spanish brought with them the encomienda system, a brutal form of forced labor that demanded the Pueblo people provide corn, blankets, and manual labor to the crown. But as heavy as the physical burden was, the spiritual burden was even heavier. The Franciscan friars were determined to eradicate the ancient religions of the Pueblo people. They viewed the traditional kivas, the underground ceremonial chambers, as dens of sorcery. They destroyed sacred objects, banned traditional dances, and used public floggings to punish those who continued to practice their ancestral faith. For the Pueblo people, their religion was not just a set of beliefs. It was their connection to the rain, the harvest, and the very survival of their communities. By the 1670s, a devastating drought and raids by nomadic tribes led many to believe that the gods were angry because the old ways had been abandoned. The breaking point came in 1675. The Spanish governor, Juan Francisco Trevino, ordered the arrest of 47 Pueblo medicine men on charges of witchcraft. 3 were hanged, 1 committed suicide, and the rest were publicly whipped. Among those whipped and released was a man from San Juan Pueblo named Pape. He left the Spanish jail with a burning resolve. He retreated to the Taos Pueblo, high in the northern mountains, where he began to weave a web of resistance that would do what no one thought possible: unite dozens of independent, linguistically diverse villages into a single, coordinated military force. Pape was a master of logistics and psychological warfare. He told the people that he had been visited by 3 spirits who commanded him to drive the Spaniards out. But the genius of his plan lay in its secrecy. To ensure the Spanish had no warning, Pape used the knotted cords. These cords were sent to every village, from the Hopi Mesas in the west to the Rio Grande Pueblos in the east. Each knot represented a day. The plan was for a simultaneous strike on August 11, 1680. However, no secret is ever entirely safe. 2 runners were captured by the Spanish and, under torture, revealed the plot. When Pape learned of the betrayal, he didn't panic. He accelerated the timeline. He sent word to strike immediately, 1 day early. On August 10, 1680, the high desert erupted. From Taos to the outskirts of El Paso, Pueblo warriors rose up against the missions and the ranches. They targeted the symbols of their oppression first. They burned the churches, destroyed the Christian icons, and killed the friars who had suppressed their traditions. Over 400 Spaniards were killed in the initial wave, including 21 of the 33 Franciscan missionaries in the province. The survivors fled toward Santa Fe, the capital and the only fortified location in the region. Within days, over 2,000 Pueblo warriors had surrounded the city. They cut off the water supply to the palace of the governors, leaving the Spanish settlers and soldiers inside to bake under the August sun. The Pueblo leaders gave the Spanish governor, Antonio de Otterman, a choice: a white cross for peace and immediate departure, or a red cross for war and total annihilation. Otterman chose to fight, but it was a losing battle. On August 21st, after a desperate sortie to break the siege, the Spanish realized their position was untenable. They began a long, humiliating retreat south toward El Paso del Norte. The Pueblo warriors watched from the hills, allowing the column of nearly 2,000 refugees to leave. They didn't want a massacre of the retreating civilians. They simply wanted their land back. For the next 12 years, the Pueblo people were free. Pape traveled from village to village, urging the people to wash away their Christian baptisms in the rivers and to return to their ancient ceremonies. They restored the kivas and tilled their fields without the burden of Spanish taxes. It was a remarkable window of indigenous sovereignty in the middle of the colonial era. However, independence brought its own challenges. The unity that Pape had forged began to fracture without a common enemy. Drought continued to plague the region, and nomadic raids from Apache and Navajos intensified. When Pape died around 1688, the leadership of the United Pueblos was gone. In 1692, the Spanish returned. Led by Diego de Vargas, a new expedition marched into Santa Fe. While some history books describe this as a bloodless reconquest, the reality was far more complex. De Vargas initially used diplomacy, promising the Pueblo people that they could keep their lands and practice their traditions if they swore loyalty to the Spanish crown. Many villages, weary of internal conflict and outside raids, agreed. But when others resisted, the reconquest turned violent, leading to years of small-scale wars and executions. Yet, despite the return of the Spanish, the Pueblo Revolt had changed the Southwest forever. The Spanish had learned a hard lesson. When they resettled the area, they were significantly more tolerant. They abolished the encomienda system of forced labor, and perhaps most importantly, they largely stopped the systematic persecution of Pueblo religious practices. This created a unique cultural synthesis that still defines New Mexico today. The Pueblo people had successfully defended their identity. Today, if you visit the Pueblos of the Southwest, you see the living legacy of 1680. The traditional dances continue, the kivas remain sacred, and the adobe villages stand as a testament to a people who refuse to be erased. The Pueblo Revolt was more than just a military victory. It was a cultural survival story. It remains a powerful reminder that history isn't just written by those who conquer, but by those who refuse to be conquered. The knots in the cord may have been untied centuries ago, but the spirit of that resistance still echoes through the canyons and mesas of the high desert.